it's suspicious that to this point, there's only been one reported offensive lineman who has a 30 visit with 49ers, right? And that's Caden Wallace. Given that it's a pretty significant need, we would say, for the 49ers, I'd say.
No doubt. That's a huge need for the 49ers. So if they're not doing 30 visits with offensive linemen, and I think one of the biggest things you can tell, and not just from the 30 visits, but prospect visits and the combine stuff and the pro days and all of that. The big one in last year, it was pretty clear. It was like they were meeting with every tight end, and you knew they were interested in tight ends. You knew it was a need, and they made it pretty obvious they were doing all of their due diligence on all the tight ends, and they ended up drafting two of the guys. And so I think linebacker was one of those last year. It was really clear. So from what you've been able to gather, and you are the foremost expert on this, what positions are they looking at the most in this draft?
Definitely think secondary is something that the 49ers are definitely looking at. A decent number of corners. They still can't stay away from defensive linemen. Like that is still very much something they're always doing their due diligence on, a number of different guys. And you mentioned the combine. That was probably where we did see the most indication that the 49ers, did talk to a lot of offensive linemen there. There just hasn't been anything after that to indicate. So, yeah, I would say those are probably the big ones. And then also wide receiver is another position that I think, the 49ers definitely going to look to target in this draft. Now, one position that, people are kind of seeing as a need these days is tight end. And I would say, based on who I've seen them have reported interest in this draft process, there hasn't been a lot of the high end tight ends like that you would think. But then again, this isn't a very strong tight end class. So based on that, I kind of think they would go tight end in the later rounds if I had a guess. But again, maybe they're just trying to, steer us away from thinking they'll take tight end early.
It kind of adds up because Aponte, this is what I was going to go to next, and that ties in perfectly because they've been looking at these. They're short-term contracts, so you're not going to change your entire course of your franchise because you sign Eric Sauber to a 1-year deal, or they signed the offer sheet with the Brock Wright from Detroit. But it does feel like they're signing guys because they're planning not to draft them early. That's what it feels like with tight end, and it's starting to feel that way at cornerback now. And maybe after all this interest and all the work they've been doing at corner, they found out, man, maybe we don't like the corners that much. And the two guys we like are not going to be there for us in the first round. And maybe we've got other plans. And so the guys we like aren't going to be there for us. So we're going to go get Isaac Yiadom. They signed Rock Ya-Sin today. Aponte, am I crazy for thinking that it's less likely that they're going to be targeting tight end and cornerback early in this draft?
No, I don't think it's crazy at all. I do think that they've actually looked into it, and this has kind of been the way that I've been looking at the Brandon Staley, Nick Sorensen thing. And even when they were going through their defensive coordinator search, everyone that was a candidate was a secondary guy. So it feels like there's a bit of a philosophy change coming where they want to prioritize corners and coverage a little bit more. But initially, when you dive into these guys, you start to think, okay, let's identify one in the draft. But then you go through the process and you're probably like, I feel a little bit more safe if we bring in a steady guy like Rock Ya-Sin and Yiadom, and it can keep Lenore in the slot. I think that's really the crux of what they're trying to do, is to try to keep Lenore in the slot because he's performed very well there and improved so much. I think where we'll see something maybe is maybe not cornerback, safety. And I think that's kind of where the crux of the whole, well, they're looking at Blackman and Justin Simmons is there. What about Hufanga, right? Like the problem is, and Steph and I talk about this all the time, is trying to win with impact players that are cheap. And you've got to try to find those in the draft. So if you can find a guy, because it certainly seems like Deshaun Gibson's not going to be there. Jair Brown seems to be slotted in as a starter. But what do you feel about Hufanga? What about if you have to pay him? So I think that's kind of where we are. I wouldn't be shocked if they went with a safety in this draft at all. And then with the tight end thing, Charlie Warner leaves, and obviously he's a blocking tight end, but them consistently being tied to other tight ends, I think more says what they think about Braden Willis and Cam Latu. And obviously, right, like it's a little bit early with Cam Lotto because he hasn't taken a snap or anything like that. But we had all heard the whispers about the drops, and the way he was kind of struggling. But I wouldn't be shocked if the 49ers, double back at the end of this draft and try to get a tight end as well, too. So I think it's like twofold. I think they're definitely in the market to find someone who can replace Warner. But I also think that they're telling you what they feel about Cam Lotto and Braden Willis going into this season as well, too. That, maybe they're not out on them, but they're not as confident that they'll take the leap that people think they will.
It's a good point here by Invader 49er. The 49ers haven't put high-end draft resources, and really as far as money, they did sign Jimmy Ward, and then they brought in Charvarius Ward. But especially at safety, and look, I trust John Lynch with safety. Like he's nailed it every single time. They've had good safety play no matter what they've done there, and they haven't put tons of dollars and resources in. And maybe that's the plan, is just to kind of keep filtering in rookie contract players and short-term, cheaper veterans if the market allows it. So maybe we shouldn't expect defensive backs to be a high priority in the draft for the 49ers.
I think it's fair. And again, Rocky Sin was very solid last season in limited snaps with the Baltimore Ravens, had a high draft grade when he was coming out. And I think they're betting on Yiadom possibly duplicating what he did last season with the Saints on the outside. More that that's not going to be the exception in his career, that maybe he's found something. And then again, when you pair that with Sorensen being a secondary guy, having played secondary in the NFC and in the NFL, and then Staley with being so good with the two high looks and being able to craft a game plan for secondary, I think it all kind of lines up for them to think that they might have found something in Yiadom.
And here's the thing: is like the room's starting to get pretty full. Like you got half a dozen corners, but pre-draft they drafted Darrell Luter in the 5th round last year, outside corner. Ambry Thomas, outside corner. Sam Womack, 5th rounder, looked really good as a rookie, and then all of a sudden disappeared. Got doghoused, it looks like, and maybe they didn't like what they saw from him in the slot. And Richard Sherman said that maybe he thought it was probably his run support didn't really work great at nickel. So now he's an outside guy. Then they signed Isaac Yiadom, outside corner. Rock Ya-Sin, outside corner. Deommodore Lenoir is the nickel. Period. Right? Like that's what they're doing. How could that not be the plan right now? And if that's the plan, then they're pretty full at outside cornerback right now with the numbers they have going into camp. So, or at least going into the draft and potentially OTAs. And again, those aren't Yiadom and Rock Ya-Sin. You cut them tomorrow, right? Those aren't long-term deals. Those aren't big money deals. But they're up to something pre-draft. And if you read between the lines, it really feels like corner and tight end are those positions they're just trying to get set. They did a lot of work on defensive line, spending some money on a couple of ends. Leonard Floyd, Vitor Gross-Matos, Shadow 49er, liked him coming out. Hasn't really developed into the guy I hoped he would be as far as a pass rusher off the end, but really fits the prototype of a long, big end that can come in and rush from the interior at points in the draft. Tells me that they're gearing up to draft an offensive lineman essentially at 31. I don't know if it's Roger Rosengarten, but I'd be shocked at this point if that's not the plan. And it really does feel like the plan. Maybe it could be a D tackle, could still be a defensive lineman. You should never take that off the board at all for the San Francisco 49ers. So that's the vibe I'm getting with all this, with what the 49ers are doing